Thanks for joining us here in Between Sundays. I'm here with Don Cox, who works with the SBCV. Thought it'd be helpful for our church to talk a little bit about what it means to be a Southern Baptist church. And then as a Southern Baptist church, how does that connect us to particular areas of ministry? So, Don, why don't you start by sharing a little bit about what you do and who you are?
Well, my name is Don Cox. I serve as a Regional Strategist for the SBC Virginia, which is a Southern Baptist Convention of Virginia. We're a network of churches in Virginia that cooperate together to do ministry together. The network itself is nearing 900 churches that speak 14 different languages, that meet in rural places like Southwest Virginia to metropolitan areas like suburban, like D.C. area, and including suburban D.C. And I work with churches here in the Valley, basically between the Harrisonburg area, down the Interstate 81 corridor, down to the Virginia Tech area, and then down to the North Carolina border in Henry County. And I live here in the Roanoke area and work with churches throughout that area.
Nice. And so as soon as I got here in Roanoke, I mean, it was maybe 2-3 days. I barely moved my stuff in. You reached out to me and was like, hey, let's grab coffee or lunch or something. I got a couple of things I'd like to get to meet you. And so I'm thankful for that. One of the first people that made connection then did the work of connecting me to other like-minded pastors from that meeting, almost instantaneous. Our friend Pete over at Cave Spring and Heath down in Salem Baptist Church. And so those relationships I still have today. And so I'm thankful for that. That's really kind. Not only that, but get to eat a meal over at your house, swim in your pool. And
the girls swam in the pool and had a good time. Actually, I was stalking you. And so, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
That's the least interesting thing you could have done with your life.
Exactly. I'm like, Richardson, who is that guy? I wonder if that's the guy on the FBI Most Wanted. Yeah, I think it is. Just kidding.
And so I understand we're a SBC church, yes. Southern Baptist Church, right. Which connects us to a lot of things. Now, I've been to Southern Baptist Seminary. I've taken the Southern Baptist classes. I've gone to the convention. I have a lot of information, indoctrination maybe, about the Southern Baptist life. But from your perspective, working with churches across the Valley, what's it mean for Rainbow Forest to be a Southern Baptist church?
I'd probably narrow it down to 3 words: history, autonomy, and collaboration. History, because Rainbow Forest began and continues to be a Southern Baptist church. You're a part of the Southern Baptist Convention, which actually began in 1845, and it has lots of gospel history behind it. In fact, gospel work that reaches around the world that you guys are a part of. For example, I know back in December and November, you guys were emphasizing an emphasis on international missions through Lottie Moon. Now, Lottie Moon is actually a human being, sure. A lady who grew up in the Albemarle County, Charlottesville area, who literally gave her life doing mission work in China. And at her passing, Southern Baptists decided that they would name an international missions offering during Christmas time after her. And that's part of our history in Virginia, part of our national history. In Virginia, you all are a part of the Virginia Network of Southern Baptists. That's what SBCV means. And that means you're part of a family of churches that actually took a stand close to 30 years ago on the inerrancy of the Bible, other doctrinal standards that are basic, and a desire to collaborate and do mission work through our national network. So you're a part of that history. Secondly, to be an SBC church means you have autonomy. In other words, what that means is autonomy means each church governs itself, but chooses to work together with other churches in different ways. That's different than independence. Independence means you're on your own, you're not connected. Your autonomy means that while you're self-governing, it means that you have resources outside yourself to help you in a time of need. For example, when the church was without a pastor, for example, there were some resources that they received that allowed them to connect with you, for example. So to be an SBC church means you're a part of the history, you're autonomous, but also it means collaboration. Collaboration means that Southern Baptist churches work together to do things they could do together they could never do on their own. An example of that, in fact, we're about to celebrate the 100th anniversary of this mechanism. In fact, the anniversary is actually tomorrow in Memphis, Tennessee, actually. It's the 100th anniversary of what's called the Cooperative Program, which is a gigantic missions. I guess the easiest way to explain it is it's like a missions mutual fund that allows churches big and small to be involved in cooperative efforts together to educate our future missionaries and pastors, to be able to plant churches, to reach places that haven't been reached yet, to send international missionaries. So to be an SBC church means it's about you're a part of the history, you're autonomous, but you work collaboratively. That's the easiest way I would say to explain it.
Yeah, and I'm thankful for that. Maybe what people don't realize, in addition to some of those things, is someone like myself who went to seminary as a part of an SBC church also got half my tuition discounted.
That's right.
Through the SBC, which I'm grateful for because they help equip, train, not put my family out of the house, so to speak, to go through seminary, while at the same time connecting churches, not only here in the Valley, but literally all across the world, through collaborative effort through the IMB, International Mission Board, while also connecting with brothers and sisters in Christ that have a similar understanding of theology and doctrine when we're talking about what it means to be Southern Baptist, not just some small tenets that we would agree upon, but an actually binding document in the Baptist faith and message, which we have as part of our documents here in the bylaws.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Well, I'm reminded of Philippians chapter 1, where Paul's writing basically a missionary thank you letter to the folks in Philippi. And here's what he says. He says, "I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion in the day of Jesus Christ." So what we have in the SBC is a partnership. It's an effort to work together to fulfill the Great Commission together. One church with a desire to reach the world, it's a wonderful desire, but how could you ever do that on your own? For lots of different reasons, which we'll probably get into. But ultimately, a partnership means we're working together. We're locking arms. We're joining hands for the purpose of working together for gospel work.
Yeah, and I see that across churches. I also see in our relationship where just a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week even, emailed you and were like, hey, I need some places where I can figure out maybe some places of rest. And you tapped into the satellite linkage and brought the full world of the SBCV down upon a document.
I hit the magic button and all of a sudden
it just printed out.
Actually, we have some ministry partners that over the years have opened up resources to minister to pastors in the way that you were seeking, like a retreat opportunity for pastors to get away. And over time, we've kind of collected those resources and partner with people to have those resources available to our people. And so I hit the magic interweb button out there.
Well, I think it's fruitful because I believe. And a part of Southern Baptist life isn't just, I believe the same things as some of these other guys, but I'm in connection that I realize that they have access to information or help, and I know they're on my team, they're on the church's team. How can we help guide the church to more faithful mission? How do we guide into reproducing a church, planning or revitalizing churches? And some of those things, I would say, this is my perspective. You don't have to own this and claim this, but okay. I believe the IMB missionary, organization is the greatest missions organization on the planet. Just not necessarily because it's the largest or it's most well equipped or any of those things, but because it's so far-reaching and intentional and connected to other brothers and sisters in Christ, and with alignment of theology and practice in such a way that if I were to say what's valuable for our church is making disciples, raising up leaders, planting churches, and we'd look across the IMB, we'd look across the SBCV, and we would see those similar things as being cornerstone. So then we partner together. We don't have to go, well, tell me what you think about this. Tell me what you think about that. Okay, so what's your end goal? And it might be humanitarian aid, or it could be social justice, or it could be, I know that when I am partnering with another SBC organization church, that we're connecting for disciple making and reproducing churches, multiplying disciples. And so I think that's really helpful for me. So, but from your perspective, you look at a church at Rainbow Forest and other churches, how do you come alongside of them? What are some ways that you, in particular, in your role, and you can define what that role is, how do you help connect the dots and help put people on that path of mission?
Well, part of it happens through relationship, kind of like the illustration of our situation, where you're a brand new pastor, brand new, box is not even unpacked yet. You're brand new on the ground in a new location, in a new place. It begins really with relationship with someone outside of just your church, but also connected with other like-minded churches, to allow you to connect with other pastors, other churches who have the same convictions as you, opportunities for joining others in the journey, for example. If I'm going to make a trip, my son lives in New Orleans. If I'm going to make a trip to New Orleans, the easy way to do it is to, type in my little Google Maps machine and find my way there. But once I land there, where do I stay? What's a good place to eat? What are safe places and unsafe places? Because, cities are like that. If someone has made that journey and has actually eaten at that restaurant or visited that particular place, it would be wise for me to say, hey, what did you learn on that? The same thing is true in church ministry life. If you're a church that's wrestling with a certain issue that others have wrestled with and they've come through on the other side, they're on the same street you're on, they're just a little further along. So why not connect those people together? Because when we can collaborate like that way, it helps others learn from the mistakes that others have made along the way, but also the benefit of learning from the lessons that they have. For example, just yesterday, I met with a church further north from here. Their pastor retired, and in my role with SBCV, I've been able to help dozens and dozens and dozens of churches through that transition process. So what I bring to the table is, hey, here's some things you might want to think about. Here's some training. Here's some first steps along the way. So it's kind of like a collaborative effort, not just doing mission work together, but also doing ministry together and to come alongside one another, because then therefore that you're not alone. That's a motto that we use, but it's actually a philosophy we try to live out. And you've experienced that.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that happen, and honestly, that's a personal experience, but that's not just for the pastors of these churches, which I think is one thing for me to have an experience and say, hey, we should really champion on the SBC's calls, and then more intimately the SBCV and the work that's happening here in Virginia, being the fact that it is our yard in which we play in. But other people are able to get connected and serve alongside of other Southern Baptists in so many particular ways, which we have had a disaster relief training. I think maybe the first one here in maybe ever. I don't know. I'd have to look at the records.
I don't really know.
But it's a way to organize and to mobilize when things like happen in Western North Carolina, and you have all this disaster. Now Southern Baptists coming out there, not just to fix people's homes, but honestly to use it as an avenue to share the gospel and connect them to their Savior. And so I think as we're thinking through that, what are other ways that you've seen Southern Baptists here in Virginia begin to partnership in such a way to see the kingdom grow here in the Valley and maybe a little further beyond that?
Well, let's let me take a little tour, but over the last several days, for example. Today in Richmond, Virginia, there are 8 different teams from 8 new churches that are being planted in the next year. They are getting training at our mission center. They are meeting in 5 different languages. One, of course, being English. The other four actually have a translation tool that was created by an engineer in one of our churches, called Polyglossia. So they're able to follow along in their own language on their iPad or phone. And that is all. That training is collaboratively funded by churches like yours, for example. Yesterday, for example, there was an outreach that takes place every weekend in one of our churches in Craig County, just north of here. And that outreach every weekend means that 50 kids in the local school actually get food for the weekend. And it's connected with a Bible buddy program that takes place every Wednesday at that particular church. And the funding for the food, not the Bible buddy program and not the discipleship material, that's a local church project, but the funding for the food is funded through hunger funds that you're a part of. And that was this past weekend. This past Friday, for example, we had a children's ministry training that took place that lay leaders from our churches were a part of 4 different training events around our state, which is one of the largest children's ministry training events around the country. There are 4 different locations around the state. That took place, as well as a training the previous weekend for women's ministry leaders who are discipling women in their churches. That's just a picture of the last little more than a week. That's just an example of it. Disaster relief training that you mentioned is something I think that's unique to how Southern Baptists do work collaboratively together, because it means that Southern Baptists already have the resources and the certification and the connections that allow them, as soon as a terrible situation take place, we can respond, right away with equipment and trained people. If a local church had a desire, for example, to do those kind of things on their own without equipment and certification and the local church government willingness to allow them in, it would take you time and effort to say, hey, let's rally some guys together with a truck, let's get some equipment, et cetera, et cetera. By then, weeks have gone by, whereas Southern Baptists have already been there. That's an example of how that happens. Let me give you another example that that's actually coming up in about a month. One of our churches in Martinsville actually does a back-to-school outreach where kids at the end of the summer, July, early August, are able to come to 3 of our churches that we help fund this project, where they receive a backpack full of school supplies, brand new shoes. In the winter, they get a brand new coat, and every one of those kids comes through the line, and they have the opportunity not only to get new shoes, they actually get their feet washed by volunteers from our churches. And while their feet are being washed, the gospel is being shared with them. That's an example that our churches can do together. And that project from one local church has actually become a partnership of 22 churches across 3 different states, which is multiplied to 4 different areas around this area that have launched their own partnership with other churches. I think that's a kind of a picture of how that happens.
Of seeing some of those things happen. That's beyond just the reach of what the pastor's doing. It's beyond just the reach of what the super Christians in the church are doing, but average, ordinary believers. They're looking to be faithful and making connection, using their gifts, skills, passions, talents to not only do work within their local community, which needs to happen, but also to partner with other brothers and sisters in Christ in other churches to accomplish some of that work. I think what I found really helpful is now I enjoy training, so I've been to a lot of you guys' training, whether that the Sunday school training that you provide or the kids training that I participated in, the worship and the AV training that you do, and I could go on and on. And those things, I don't show up going, here's my $100 to pay for this training, and let me make sure I talk to the right people and make the right connections so I can get invited to these things. I mean, you guys are doing a great job of saying, here's some good people that have been doing this for a while. They want your church to succeed. We want your church to succeed. So let's gather together and bring those pastors together to not only hear the training content, but we want them to get to know one another. We want them to connect together. We want churches to connect together. And I think that's been really instrumental in continuing a nucleus of collaboration, because aside from that, it's too easy to come back to our own churches, look around at our own problems and go, well, I got enough to do here. I don't really need to concern myself about those churches down in Salem or that church that's across town 30 minutes or whatever it may be. But the good news is we can get together in such a way through connections like yours that provide ways to train and care for one another that extends beyond just the quote-unquote ministry day in and day out. And so I think that's been fruitful. Obviously, you've come to preach for us a few times. We're thinking about having you back again this summer. Really got to pray about that.
That'd be great. Clearly, you got to make sure to do some background on that.
Yeah, so it's not just, oh, well, we're benefiting from you. Hopefully, you're being encouraged by churches like ours.
Oh, yeah.
That would affirm and say, well, there's another church down the road that I see some good stuff happening here. Why don't you give this pastor a call, or why don't you go by and check out that? In fact, I know 2 members of our church that you recommended to come visit our church when they were looking for a home. And thankfully, by God's grace, they decided to come, stay, joined a small group, and have been faithful contributing members of our church. And so I see it well-rounded to be able to see the partnerships that Southern Baptists have. So as you're thinking about maybe just kind of bringing into summation here, what do you hope happens at a church like ours? I know that's not on your question list, but what do you hope happens, church like ours, who has a doctrinal alignment, Southern Baptist belief, connected to the history that you shared, and desiring to be autonomous? You know, we want to self-govern, take steps where we want to take steps, but at the same time collaborate with other churches in such a way that, you know, what's a success story for an SBC church here in the Valley?
That's a great question. I would probably say it's twofold. I think I would love for Rainbow Forest to see the value of being a part of a bigger gospel family, and seeing the value of how when, for example, the Pantelios, who was a youth pastor in Troutville, not far from here, gets called to international missions and goes to Malta, uproots his young family and goes there. That although he wasn't in your church, he's one of your missionaries. And that when he's looking for connection, support, and encouragement, support not financially, because that's already provided through our network, but just to know that his young kids have uncles and aunts that care about him and pray for him on their birthday and want to minister to them. That would be awesome. And Caleb and Heather, who are going to be going to Columbia, of all places, next year, from another church just north of here, that they're your missionaries too. Although they weren't in Rainbow Forest, maybe one day they'll come and tell their story by way of video or in person. But that's not the point. The point is they're a part of a family of churches, and you all are a part of it. I'd love to see that. The second thing I'd love to see is there are many pastors and churches that are struggling. And you've done some of this already. Now, you're too humble to mention it, but there are some young pastors that I've pointed you in the direction of, who are young in ministry, maybe need some encouragement. If you come alongside them, I'd love to see that multiplied. And also struggling churches that if we as a family of churches can come alongside them and help them, maybe they wouldn't close. Maybe they're in a community that's changed and they're surrounded by houses, but they're not reaching those folks. What if your church came alongside to help that church keep from closing, to keep from losing a gospel outpost in that community, to be able to come alongside and say, hey, we'll help, because this is God's kingdom work, big K, not little k as in the little kingdom that we have, but that we think we have. But ultimately, can we come alongside so that we don't have a church closed with a for sale sign on the outside, for example. I think about one of our churches a little further north of here. We're about to have this story in our magazine where you can read some of these stories I've been talking about. This church in Fishersville, surrounded by homes, 2 new housing developments, 250 homes in each of them. And this little church was struggling and had been for years, so much so that their pastor just quit the ministry. He literally just said, I'm going to go work at the local home development shopping store. That's literally what he did. And the church was down to about 25 people, and everybody was 75 years and above. And trying to coach them how to get through this process, one of our neighboring churches came alongside them and helped them. Made sure that they could have a worship service on Sunday by providing volunteers for the children's department. At the time, they didn't have any kids, but soon they started to have kids showing up to church, have someone to preach, someone to help lead the music. Ultimately, that led to the relaunch of that church about 14 months ago. And like I said, they were running about 25 people. They run about 500 now, and they have baptized. In fact, they baptized in the first 6 months more people than were attending the struggling church 8 months before that.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that I'd love for your church to get a heart for realizing they're part of a family of missionaries and churches that's reaching the world, and also coming alongside local pastors, local churches, and to make a difference together. That kind of thing, not only does it get me excited, it also is something that multiplies, and it's not just for the professional pastor, for example. It's local people and local churches making a kingdom difference, and you don't have to have a seminary degree to do that. In fact, the church I told you about in Fishersville, there was an older man in the church who, in the struggling church, before they decided to go through the relaunch process, replanting we call it, he said, I'm against this because they play that music. I don't like that music. Well, he was all against it until the moment his granddaughter, who'd never been in church before, came to faith in Jesus in that launch, and in the process began to sing on the praise team. And then you know who became a champion for that new entity? Grandpa.
Sure.
His name is Otis. I love to tell the story of Otis because I saw Otis about 6 months ago when I guest preached there, and his wife hugged me and he said, "Thank you for not giving up on us." That's the kind of thing I would love for Rainbow to be a part of.
Yeah, well, that's great. And there again, connecting the stories, having walked the streets a little bit further than the rest of us, and being able to see the neighborhood in such a way that helps other people process that together. I'm thankful to be a Southern Baptist church. It's part of the reason I even applied to come here, Rainbow Forest, so many years ago now, and looking for the opportunity to continue to strengthen those bonds, not only with other churches, but with you and other SBCV guys and girls that serve and connect people together. And so I'm thankful for your service. We're grateful for it. Whether the church realizes how instrumental it's been for our church, I can say 100% that it has been. And so I'm thankful for what you do, how you serve, but also the heart you have for pastors and churches here in the Valley. So
thank you.
I appreciate
that means a lot. I'm very grateful for Rainbow, and Rainbow's Forest been a part of our network for a long time. And I'm grateful to see what God's doing here, and for your leadership and for your kind words. We're grateful for what God's doing in our fellowship. Our fellowship started almost 30 years ago with about exactly 114 churches, and now we're about to hit 900. 400 of those were churches planted by our churches in the last 25 years. Wow. That'll blow your mind when you begin to think
nearly
about
half at this point. Well, praise the Lord for faithful Baptists that have been good to make disciples, multiply churches throughout not just our short history as a church, but hundreds of years now with the SBC. And so I'm thankful for that. Thanks for tuning in, giving us some time, talk about some things between Sundays. Looking forward to the next podcast with you.